Last week's discussion talked of coordination, the process of coordination, where ideas up to independent clauses are put together, combined, using coordinating conjunctions, conjunctive adverbs. We also had introduced to our class punctuation marks. Those that could be used to again attain the process of coordination in just a sentence. But coordination is not the only process that we could use or we could do for our sentences. We could do the one that we have for this week, and that is the process of subordination. In discussing the process of subordination, this time, the second other clause will come in. Last week, we talked about clause. I gave as well definite descriptions of a clause. Clarice, can you tell us once again what things should we keep in mind in order for us to identify a group of words to be called a clause? What are the requirements for a clause to be called a clause? Go.
It must be a group of words, compose a thought which could be complete or incomplete.
So you have a group of words. By the way, I'll just turn my camera off. Claire, if you don't mind, you can. I'd like to request that you keep your camera on so that the viewers, could still see the Simply Show. So Clarice has mentioned all three significant characteristics. Again, a clause will only be called as such if it's a group of words, first requirement. Second requirement, if in that group of words there's a subject and a predicate, or by definition a verb. Third requirement, in that group of words with a subject and a predicate, that set should be capable of expressing a thought, either complete or incomplete. If the thought is complete, we have an independent clause. If a thought is incomplete, then we have a dependent clause. At this point, the process of subordination makes use of the two types of clauses. We need to have an independent clause and a dependent clause combined. Again, in the process of subordination, an independent clause and a dependent clause are combined. So we need to have a clause which expresses a complete thought. We also need to have another clause which expresses an incomplete thought. What is it again that will tell us that the clause is incomplete? Simple, we try to read it. If in reading that group of words, we are giving a hanging impression as though something is missing, that makes the clause an incomplete one, a dependent clause. For example, if you have because she is with you, like you read it as it is, because she is with you, see, something is about to come. Something is supposed to be placed or said right after it. Thus, that group of words is still an incomplete one. It still needs something for it to actually exist in a sentence. And what does a dependent clause need? It needs an independent clause. Again, in the process of subordination, an independent clause and a dependent clause are combined. It's not just one independent clause and another independent clause. Subordination doesn't happen in the combination of these two independent clauses. Coordination is what's rather taking place. If you want to do subordination, again, let there be a dependent clause and an independent clause. What words then can we use for the process of subordination? Sorry. Once again, we are introduced to the concept of conjunctions. Sorry. We shall rely once again on conjunctions here. And to be more specific, we are going to rely on subordinating conjunctions. And there's like a list of them. There's like a good pool of subordinating conjunctions in our alley. For example, you have words like because, since, so that, even though, even if, the list may go on. You have, in fact, the list there found in your module, which reminds me, I was actually surprised during your ST when students used because as a conjunction. The letter B in fanboys is not for the word because. It is rather for the word but. Because is a subordinating conjunction. There are though some reminders that we need to keep in mind when we use subordinating conjunctions. First reminder, if your sentence begins with a dependent, by the way, let me just also state this, all dependent clauses begin with a subordinating conjunction. Without a subordinating conjunction, there's nothing in that clause that could differentiate it from a dependent clause and an independent clause. So general rule, all dependent clauses begin with a subordinating conjunction. There are cases that the word that may be omitted, but the omission of that can still be traced to the presence of that originally in that dependent clause. There are just others who try to omit that and still they have a dependent clause. The omission again can be traced to the presence of that in its original structure. And again, all dependent clauses on a general note begin with a subordinating conjunction. So here's one reminder. If your dependent clause starts the sentence, the dependent clause shall be separated from the main clause using a comma. Please take note of that. Again, if your dependent clause starts the sentence, not the independent clause, the dependent clause shall be separated from the main clause or independent clause. The main clause is just equivalent to your independent clause. They're just the same. Don't also be surprised if I call the dependent clause the subordinating clause. They are just still the same. As said, if your sentence begins with a dependent clause, the dependent clause shall be separated from the main clause using a comma. For example, by the way, when I tell you to subordinate clauses, expect that you'll have two independent clauses at the start. Subordinating clauses would mean that you'll transform one clause into a dependent clause. Furthermore, that dependent clause should now begin with a subordinating conjunction. For example, let's have independent clause number 1. The first independent clause is she smiled at him. No, she smiled at her friends. Independent clause number 2. They were waving at her. So you have two independent clauses here. Two independent clauses that we could combine in the process of subordination. And then we can decide which between them can we turn into a dependent clause. In my case, I'll try doing it with independent clause number 2. Before I arrive at the right choice of subordinating conjunction, I'll have to determine first the relationship of the two independent clauses. What's the connection between these two independent clauses? Because that will guide me in the correct and most appropriate and logical choice of a subordinating conjunction. They smiled at her. They were waving at her. Oh, sorry, she smiled at her friends. They were waving at her. Is it safe to say that we could see a cause-effect kind of connection between these two clauses? That since people waved their hands at her, that's the reason why she smiled? So I think we could. So among our list of subordinating conjunctions, I can use because. And so my sentence may be stated this way: because they were waving at her, comma, she smiled at her friends. Look at what I did there. What is our dependent clause in that sentence that uses subordination? It's because they were, wait, sorry. It's because they were waving at her. Notice the dependent clause that I have identified. The dependent clause does not begin, as I identified it, again, as I identify the dependent clause, it does not begin with an uppercase first letter. The first letter of a dependent clause is not in uppercase. The reason behind it is the dependent clause is not a sentence in itself. Another thing I'd like you to notice, the dependent clause does not have any end mark. You cannot put a period to it because, again, it's not a sentence. You cannot also put a comma to it because a comma is not an end mark. You leave the comma in the original statement, in the original sentence. Dependent clauses do not have end marks at all. What is our independent clause? Independent clause. From that sentence, our independent clause is, she smiled at her friends. And notice how I identified the independent clause. It begins with an uppercase letter S for she and ends with a period, because an independent clause is a sentence in itself. Sir, if I look at the sentence that you created that follows subordination, the letter S of she is not in uppercase. It's not, because it's not the first word of that sentence. The first word of that sentence is the word because. That's why its letter B is in uppercase. But the moment you identify the dependent clause, the first letter of that dependent clause is not supposed to be set in uppercase. But the first letter of all independent clauses should be in uppercase, as these independent clauses are sentences themselves. They are in themselves capable of expressing a complete thought. Not to mention that each of them, each independent clause ends with an end mark, has its own end mark. Sir, is it possible that I do not follow that structure where the dependent clause begins the sentence? Yes, of course. You can use a dependent clause and place it after the main clause. Main clause. And in such a case, you don't need a comma. Let's use the same two clauses. She smiled at her friends because they were waving at her. In this one, subordination takes place. Subordination is here. And no comma is used to separate the main clause from the dependent clause. If you put a comma, that will lead to an incorrect statement because you are not dealing with the first rule here. Any questions so far? Any question? When it comes to subordinating conjunctions, we can actually have two groups. Your typical subordinating conjunctions like because, since, the ones that I've enumerated earlier. You also have relative pronouns. Our relative pronouns that can function as relative conjunctions are which, who, that, whose, whom, when, and where may even function at times as relative pronouns. These are relative pronouns that function as relative conjunctions. And when they act as relative conjunctions, they become subordinating conjunctions. When are they used? These relative conjunctions are used for adverb, sorry, not adverb, adjective clauses. And an adjective clause placed inside an independent clause follows the process of subordination. All adjective clauses or an adjective clause is a dependent clause in the first place. So again, since an adjective clause is a dependent clause, that kind of clause follows the process of subordination as it is placed inside an independent, together or combined with an independent clause. For example, the bag is expensive. That's independent clause number one. Independence, oh wait, let me classify that. Independent clause number one. The bag is expensive. There. What's independent clause number two? There. There are two independent clauses here, and one can be subordinated to the other clause. How will you do that? Using a relative conjunction, a relative pronoun which is then turned into a subordinating conjunction. Now it becomes yeah. What happened to your shirt? Now it becomes
I cannot change my BG in the back circle. My face will also be
really? Did you try doing it?
my face will disappear. You want to see, sir?
You can't do this? You're like a phantom. That's the case. Isa lang ang patunay nito. Isa lang ang pinapatunay niyan, Shania. Ang puti mo talaga. So what does this mean? We have good contrast with the background. Oh, let's put it there. We have established good contrast. Let's try to subordinate one of these two clauses. To subordinate it with the use of a relative conjunction, you should try to also consider the right one. We use who if you are referring to persons. We use whose for the same purpose, whom, same purpose. When, if it's in a matter of time, where, a matter of place. Which is for one that is not human. That is for one that is considered abstract, and also for those which are non-humans. So we can use which in here. We can also use that. To subordinate it, you can have a sentence that goes, the possible first sentence is, the bag which is owned by my mother is expensive. That's one. Another option, the bag which is owned, which is expensive is owned by my mother. In here, let's examine the first sentence. The one that says the bag which is owned by my mother is expensive. Our main clause there, our independent clause is the bag is expensive. Our dependent clause is which is owned by my mother. All dependent clauses will begin with a subordinating conjunction, and that is the word which in that statement. Number two, the second sentence reads, the bag which is expensive is owned by my mother. What is our independent clause? That is, the bag is owned by my mother. What is our dependent clause? It's which is expensive. What's common between those two sentences is the use of the same relative pronoun or relative conjunction. The same kind. It's the word which. The word that can also be used. So you may have arrive at one that says, the bag that is owned by my mother is expensive, or the bag that is expensive is owned by my mother. So you have there the process of subordination at work, such that two clauses are combined. One was turned into a dependent clause and the other has retained its being an independent clause. You cannot have two independent clauses in subordination. At least there should be one that is a dependent clause. Questions? Any question? Before I proceed with checking the activities found in your module, let me remind you of these words. Because versus because of. Because is a subordinating conjunction. Subordinating conjunction. While because of is a preposition. Please take note of that. It doesn't mean that you'll see the word because, then right away it is a conjunction. Who knows what comes after because is the word of. And if that's the case, of turns because into a preposition. For example, I need this car because I have to leave early. Our independent clause there is I need this car. Our dependent clause is because I have to leave early. Once again, please notice the dependent clause, it does not begin with an uppercase letter B, and it does not have an end mark because it's just a dependent clause. The case is different with an independent clause because in itself, it is a sentence. It can supposedly stand on its own. In that statement, because is indeed a conjunction. It bridged two kinds of clauses. What about this one? I need this car because of my early interview. In this case, we only have one clause, and that is an independent clause, the one that starts from I and ends at the word interview. Sir, what is the function of because of? Because of begins our prepositional phrase. Our prepositional phrase here is because of my early interview. Because of is our preposition, interview is our object of the preposition. You also have other words like after, before, and even while. These words may also function as prepositions. For example, after she decided to leave, the crowd went on a rampage. In that statement, our dependent clause is after she decided to leave, while our independent clause is the crowd went on a rampage. Our dependent clause does not begin with an uppercase letter A for after, does not also have an end mark because it's not a sentence. Our independent clause must begin with a capital letter T and must end with a period since it is on its own a sentence. The use of after here is for the purpose of subordination, especially that obviously what you could find after is the word she together with decided. She being the subject, decided being the verb in that clause. When can after function as a preposition? The crowd went on a rampage after her arrival. That's our example. The crowd went on a rampage after her arrival. In this case, our independent clause is just the sentence itself. The words after her arrival make your prepositional phrase. After is the preposition, arrival is the object of the preposition. Again, consider the words that come after those, the ones that I've identified. If those words contain or include a subject and a predicate, then those words are indeed subordinating conjunctions. If they don't, then they are just merely prepositions. Questions? Any question? Any clarification? For FT2, don't be surprised if all words, all groups of words there are ended with a period. That is intentionally done. Because if I ended only the independent clauses with periods, that would right away give the answer. But I have to set it fairly that even if it's a dependent clause, I have to end it with a period. But to make it clear, to point out specifically, I did that only for FP2. That was intentionally done, so as not to give away right away the answer. Shall we now proceed into checking FPs 1 to 5? Do we have any question with the discussion? Any question? Please ask.
Sir,
Yes.
I want to clarify something. The prepositional, the because of, is it still is it still a conjunction?
It's a preposition. A conjunction and a preposition are two different parts of speech. If you see because, just the word because, and the word of does not come after it, then it's a conjunction. But if you see the expression because of, it's a preposition. And it does not do subordination anymore.
Oh, all right. Thank you,
Okay.
sir.
So let's try now FT1. Let's try FT1, people. Please go over your modules. The goal in FT1 is to determine whether that group of words is a clause or not. If that group of words turns out to be a clause, you write yes. If it's not, you write no. For the rise of the nation, clause or not, Clarice?
No.
It's not correct. Sir, the word rise, sir, is that not the subject? It is a noun. The nation, sir, it's still a noun. When can a noun function as a subject? If it's paired together in the context of a clause, if it goes together with a predicate. But there's none. It's just, in fact, a prepositional phrase. Because of you, Claire.
Yes.
Again, there was something that I said earlier about because of.
Oh, no.
No, correct. Once again, carefully examine what word comes after because. If it's of, automatically we don't have here a clause. Number 3, nothing to worry, Krisha.
No.
No, correct. It does not possess the complete characteristics for a clause to be called a clause. Number 4, he is sick, Ralph.
Yes, sir.
Yes, correct. Number 5, Avril, since you are not around.
Yes, sir.
It is a clause, correct. Number 7, Patrick. This is it. And Patrick is gone. Mishaila, are they there? Patrick is there. Sorry, Patrick.
No, sir.
No. Are you sure? Shania, this is it. Clause or not?
It's a clause.
It's a clause. Patrick, let's try to process number 7. It's a group of words, obviously. Second, answer for number 3, no. Number 7 again. It's a group of words, correct? Does that group of words contain a subject and a predicate? This is the subject. Is, it's verb. So it's a clause. It is composed of a group of words with a subject and a predicate. In fact, it can stand on its own. This is it. It can be an independent clause, to be more specific. Hold it there, Daniel.
It is, sir.
Again,
It is.
it is correct. It's an imperative one. It's a command. In the cavern, no. In the canyon, no. Excavating for a mine, Rainiel.
Yes.
Is it? What's the subject, Rainiel?
Mine.
Again,
The mine.
mine. Are you sure? If you say that,
no.
if you say that mine is the subject, what is the verb? Radial, what's the verb in number 11? Hello, Radial. What's the verb in number 11? Rainiel? Don't mute yourself. Don't mute yourself.
Excavating.
Excavating, that's your verb? Is there a verb in that structure?
There's no, sir. There's no.
There's none, correct. Just because you see an action word doesn't mean that it's a verb right away in the sentence. Not all action words in a sentence act or function as verbs. Correct, Avril. Excavating here could possibly be a gerund. It could even be a present participle. And both are verbals and not verbs. Which means that excavating is indeed not a verb. But I won't deny to you, is it an action word? It is an action word. It's just that in that group of words, it does not function as a verb. That's a different story. To know how it functions in a sentence is different from to know what it looks like. It looks like an action word to me, sir. Yes, it is an action word. But go into how it functions in the sentence. Does it function as a verb? That's an entirely different thing. Also, just because you see a noun or a pronoun doesn't mean that it right away acts as the subject. Recall your lessons in your lower grades. Functions of nouns, functions of pronouns. Again, just because you see one doesn't mean that its function is that of a subject. Nouns and pronouns take on several other functions. Number 11 is with no. Number 12, my life changed. Jed.
Yes, sir.
Correct. So that I can go. Erwin.
Yes.
It's yes, correct. So that is in fact a subordinating conjunction. So easy, Micah. is gone. Mishaila, so easy. No response. George,
No.
no, correct. It does not function as a clause. Where life goes without a trace, Claire.
Yes.
It's a clause, correct. Number 16, therefore you should go, Shania.
Yes.
It's a clause, correct. Bringing not a soul, Avril.
Hello, sir. Can you hear me?
Bringing not a soul, go. Number 17.
It is
You're
no.
correct. It's not a clause. By the people, Krisha. No, correct. As young as the dog, Ralph.
Sir?
As young as the dog.
No, sir.
Actually, I'll get back to number 19 later on. Even if I am here, Clarice.
Yes.
Yes. As for number 19, that's what we refer to as an elliptical clause. It is still a clause. In fact, its supposed complete form is as young as the dog is or was. Familiar of maybe you've said something that goes, for a while I'll type something in chat box. Sorry. I don't know if you've said something like that. I am as old as you. Or you've heard people say something like that. The complete version of that is I am as old as you are. So a verb has been omitted, but there is supposedly a verb in it because it is what we refer to as an elliptical clause. Comparative clauses which are dependent in nature. Questions regarding FE1 before we go to FE2. The goal of FE2 is to determine whether the clause is dependent or independent. Actually, this is quite simple. Why? If that group of words begins with a subordinating conjunction, then it most probably is a dependent clause. Without a subordinating conjunction, most probably it's an independent clause. For example, because is there, automatically that is dependent. Number 2, you cannot see any subordinating conjunction that starts with a group of words. It's an independent clause. Also, if you try to read it, right away, number 2, if you try to read it, it right away gives a complete impression. Working at this job is a lot of fun, period. Compared to number 1, because it's the best solution. Meaning, there must have been something said before to make it be the best solution, but nothing comes out. Therefore, number 1 is a dependent clause. Number 3, it doesn't really interest me. That is independent. Number 4, I should have given her a ride. Another independent clause. Number 5, after the movie is over, that's dependent. 6, if he ever calls, it begins with, again, you could see there, an if word, and if is a subordinating conjunction, and that should tell you that this one is a dependent clause. Whenever I have the time, that's another dependent clause. There could be a problem. That's not dependent, that's independent. Since the last time they visited, Dependent. Whenever it gets cold, dependent clause. FT3, the goal is quite simple. You just have to encircle the subordinating conjunction used in each of the sentences below. For number 1, it's although. Although they are found in many cultures around the world, murals have always been a particularly important art form in Mexico. 2, some of the murals painted by the Mayan artists in ancient Mexico still survive, though many are in poor condition. Though. 3, before the Mexican painter Diego Rivera came on the scene, 20th century Mexican murals were relatively unknown. Before. Number 4, Rivera designed extraordinary murals before he died in 1957. Before. Many of Rivera's murals depict scenes from Mexican history because Rivera believed that Mexicans are defined by their past. Because. And again, you look at the word that comes after because. It's not of, it's the name of Rivera. After Rivera died, many Mexican-American muralists took up his style and themes. After. Some Mexican-American artists in Los Angeles paint murals whenever they can find space. Whenever. Number 8. They paint on public buildings so that their work can be enjoyed by many people. So that. Number 9. So that the murals can be easily seen, the muralists use bright colors and bold, eye-catching designs. So that. It's not just so. If you just only encircled so, you are giving us there a coordinating conjunction, and so is not a subordinating conjunction. Number 10, as long as Hispanic culture continues to thrive in the United States, we will surely have many colorful and exciting murals to enjoy. As long as. Questions?
It's not only us, sir.
It's as long as. That's the complete version of this. You could also see it there in the first page of the module. As is different from as long as a subordinating conjunction. Clarice, anything else?
Yes, sir, thank you.
Okay. We shall skip FT4 for the meantime. Anyway, the goal of FT4 is just to supply words. My goal is for you to be able to do subordination, like to combine sentences such that one clause is turned into a dependent clause, a subordinate to the main clause. Have you done FT? I know that the modules just came out today, but have you tried working on it earlier? Quite sad. And anyway, so I don't blame you because again, the modules just came out today. Let's just try for the purpose of discussions. Let's go over the numbers. I cried. My mother left me in school. Try to combine them using subordination. I'd like to begin with Clarice.
I cried because my mother left me in school.
Correct. Sir, my statement is, because my mother left me in school, I cried. What's the important reminder there, Claire? Listen to this. What if the answer is, because my mother left me in school, I cried. In that sentence, what's the important reminder that we should tell ourselves? I had given it in the chat box. It's in the chat box. Because my mother left me in school, I cried. What should you put in the sentence?
A dependent clause.
A dependent clause. Yes, we turned one into a dependent. Avril is raising her hand. Yes, thank you for that, Claire. Avril?
A comma
Correct. Where will you put the comma, Avril?
after the dependent clause.
Correct. After the dependent clause. Please be reminded of this, the first consideration, first reminder. If the dependent clause starts your sentence, that dependent clause shall be separated from the main clause using a comma. If that's your style, and unfortunately you have left out the comma, your answer will have to be marked wrong. The comma is a necessity. It's a requirement. Number 2, my classmates always tease me. I come to school early. You can say, my classmates always tease me even if I come to school early. Or you can use even though in lieu of even if. Or because I come to school early, my classmates always tease me.
Excuse me,
Whenever,
sir.
yes, go, Sharaya.
Oh, never mind. You already said it.
Whenever,
Yeah.
okay. So is it this one? My classmates always tease me whenever I come to school early.
Yes.
Okay. Anybody has a different answer for subordination? Number 2. Number 3, I'll give number 3 to Daniel. Daniel?
Sir, I haven't answered po, sir.
Yeah. Just try to combine them now.
Uh, the teacher locked the classroom as he was taking his exams.
Wait, where are you looking at he was taking?
As he was given an exams to the absentees.
Was? Is it was?
As
As
he is.
wait, your verb. What's your verb? As he
Is
is.
giving an exam to the absentees.
You don't need to change the verb tenses. There's nothing to be changed about them. Number 4, or if you have a different answer, you can reserve that for later, but let's try to go over the items first. Number 4, Krisha. Try to combine them.
Many claims to be very busy as they are given a task.
Correct. Many claim to be very busy as they are given a task. Number 5, lives need to be treasured. They cannot anymore be brought back. I'd like to give this to Erwin.
Since
Combine. Don't just give me.
wait, lives need to be treasured since they cannot anymore be brought back.
Correct. By the way, in the ST, if that's what just happens, that supposedly you are to construct a sentence and all that you did is to provide a word, unfortunately, the answer will have to be marked incorrect. Number 6. She was about to jump. Somebody tried to stop her. I'd like to ask George to combine them using subordination.
Wait lang, sir.
Number 6 now.
She was about to jump until somebody tried to stop her.
Okay, until somebody tried to stop her. Number 7, the girls were screaming loudly. They saw their favorite band, Rainier. Combine them. Rainier.
Sir,
Number
can you hear
7.
me, sir?
Number 7, go.
Some the FTT, sir.
We are now on FT5.
55. The girls were screaming loudly because they saw their favorite band.
Correct. Because they saw their favorite band. Number 8, mother was cooking in the kitchen. Father was just watching movies. Ralph.
Mother was
cooking in the kitchen while father was just watching movies.
Correct. Mother was cooking in the kitchen while father was just watching movies. Number 9. They were still met with a surprise. They had been told about it. I'd like to ask Avril.
They were still met with a surprise, even though they had been told.
Even though they had been told about it. Correct. Last number 10. We need to pass the exam. We can get good grades. Patrick, please try. Patrick? It's none from Patrick. Mishaila? None from Mishaila. Shania, number 10.
We need to pass the exam so that we can get good grades.
Correct. Take note, the answer of Shania made use of so that and not just so. There's a difference. So is for coordination. So that is for subordination. FT4, let's do it. I'll try to do quickly FT4. Yeah, in lieu of even if, you can have even though, Clarice. Even if, even though, although, though, they more or less bear the same intent. We can't name the earliest painters because they did not sign their work. Since they did not sign their work, as they did not sign their work. The art of painting began as early as the Paleolithic age. Blank prehistoric hunters decorated walls of their caves. When prehistoric hunters decorated walls of their caves. Blank, some ancient Greek painters are known, their works have not survived. Even if, even though, although their works have not survived. Number 4, images covered walls, gates, palaces, and temples. It seems likely that professional painters lived in Sumeria and ancient Egypt. As images, number 5, decorations of Greek pottery were baked permanently into the surface so that they could be preserved. In order that they could be preserved. Number 6, blank, they could not be baked. Many paintings on wood or walls have been lost. Since, because, as. Number 7, Roman painters used a heating process. Blank, their paintings might be preserved. So that, in order that. Number 8, they discovered that paintings weathered better. Blank, they were mixed with boiling wax, resin, and vegetable oils. When they were mixed. 9, blank, wealthy Roman citizens admired art. Fresco paintings covered the walls of their houses. Since, because, as. 10, blank Roman painters were very skillful. Few of their works have endured. Even if, even though, although Roman painters were very skillful, few of their works have endured. There's a slight difference only between although and though. In terms of use, although is used more, is used highly for the formal use of English, while though is more of a conversational purpose. The same applies more or less to even if and to even though. Questions regarding the discussion on subordination, on the answers for FEs 1 to 5. So we managed to finish everything in 1 hour. Perfect. Yes, Shania. Go. Let's see who has a question first. It's fine. Who you start because I still have a class at 1:30.
May you repeat the answers 14 to 15 in FT1 and 1 to 3 in FT4?
FT1, 14 to 15?
Yes.
No, yes. 14, 15, no, yes. 1 to 4, FT4. We can't name the early painters as, since, because they did not sign their work. Number 2, the art of painting began as early as Paleolithic age when prehistoric hunters decorated walls of their caves. Number 3, blank, some ancient Greek painters are known, their works have not survived, even though, even if, although, though. Number 4, blank images covered walls, gates, palaces, and temples. It seems likely that professional painters lived in Sumeria and ancient Egypt, as, because, since.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Clarice, you have a question?
For FT5, number 3, sir, what
Go, go.
subordinating conjunction does fit both?
And again, sorry.
For FT5, number 3, what subordinating conjunction does fit the
The question of Clarice is what subordinating conjunction best fits the combination of the two clauses? I won't really say that there's one that's the best because can be used, since can also be used, as can also be used, while can also be used. For as long as you will not lose the integrity of the relationship between the two sentences that we had. Remember the first thing that I had in our example earlier? For the first two pairs of independent clauses that I gave, and that was with, what were those two? For the bag is expensive, the bag is owned, no, not that. For, she smiled at her friends, they were waving at her. The first thing that I did there was to determine the connection or the relationship of the two sentences. Knowing the relationship of these two will guide you on the correct or the most logical or appropriate choice of subordinating conjunction. So I hope that answers your question, Clarice. I won't say that it's that because is the best, because since can also serve the purpose. Okay, I hope that answers your question. Anything else? Especially if you have an ST to take on Saturday, on Monday of next week. Fortunately, the lesson on conjunctions was already introduced last week. The lesson on clauses was also introduced last week. We are just reinforced this week with the process of subordination. That aside from coordination, we can do subordination. If there are no questions, I think we can call it a day from there.
Goodbye and thank you, grade 9.
Goodbye and
Goodbye.
thank
Goodbye and
you.
thanks,
Bye. Thank you, sir. Same.